Welcome back to another episode of the Isn't That Rich podcast. Today we are honored to have Mayor Absher as our guest today. He is the mayor of Marion, and recently we attended a chamber event, and it was a luncheon, and he gave a State of the City of Marion address. And we found that information so valuable that we wanted to share it with the entire community that also listens to our podcast. So it is my honor to introduce Mayor Mike Absher.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, Mr. Absher, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey in becoming the mayor of Marion? I know it's been an interesting few years.
Yeah. Well, I to make it simple, I first ran for the school board in 2011 and enjoyed that, frankly, a lot more than I anticipated enjoying it. The last 6 years, I was the president of the school board, and it was just a real honor to be a part of the school district. But I didn't think that, two things, I didn't think I wanted to, I had kind of accomplished the things that I said I wanted to accomplish by coming there. So I didn't really know whether I wanted to keep running for school board or not. And, but I didn't really want to give up that part of my dual existence, being a business person and serving the community in some way. So initially I had thought that, and this is going back several years, keep in mind the context, the background of this is that Mayor Butler, my predecessor, had been mayor 7 years prior to me being born.
Yeah, he was.
So literally I had the concept of someone else being mayor it was almost impossible to know when that would, I mean, obviously at some point that's going to happen, but you don't know when that's going to happen or anything. But I thought maybe I would enjoy serving on the city council.
Right.
And so I had made some mental plans to do that. And then prior to Mayor Butler's term expiring, he stepped down due to health reasons. Mm-hmm. And that was in January, I think, of 2018. With the election for mayor being in April of 2019. And so then I really did a checkup from the neck up and decided that despite my reservations of not knowing entirely what the job entailed and what I was getting myself into, I really thought I would enjoy this job. And so I threw my hat in the ring in September of 2018 and was elected in April of 2019. And so I've been mayor since April 22nd of 2019. So I'm almost to the 5-year point, coming in April. And that's the simple version of that story. So
I love that you didn't even imagine, because Mayor Butler, he was one of the longest serving mayors in the U.S. is what I remember.
Longest serving one in Illinois, for sure. And
Okay.
I think second longest serving one in the country, if I remember right.
Yeah, pretty incredible. But I know since you have become mayor, you've made some pretty great changes. I think everybody in this city is very excited about. I know we are here. We are personally, Tom and I are very excited about some of the things that you've made happen here, and I'm ready to talk about some of those things today. Yeah, so let's get started. What happened in 2023 for the city of Marion? I'll just let you take it away. I know when you gave your presentation, you started talking about something I didn't really know about but found interesting, was the star bonds. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for 3 years, we've been working to resurrect an opportunity that first presented itself in, I think, 2010, 2011, when they passed, the state legislature passed. It's not called star bonds in the legislation. It's some long Economic Innovation Act with several other terms in there. But STAR is an acronym, and it stands for Sales Tax and Revenue.
Okay.
Some people call it alternative revenue. But what that means is the legislation was put into place, like I said, about 2010. It was a big to-do back in that day. And it was really modeled after Kansas, which was the first in the nation to employ this concept. And it's very complicated legislation. It was very complicated to meet all the rules and regulations to get to where we're at now. But it's pretty simple in its form and function. And what it contemplates is if a locality, a municipality, in combination with a appointed master developer, can come up with a concept that is either entertainment, retail, tourism based, and prove through feasibility studies and such that you can get a certain number of people from a certain radius miles away to come to here, that the state will then pledge its incremental sales tax revenue. And that part of it varies quite a bit. But basically, they'll come to the table with an economic incentive in the form of sales tax that then they basically give to the city. The city has to pledge its incremental sales tax. And that just means anything new within that district. It's not any existing revenues or anything. But then you can, because of the legislation, the way it's set is that you can then borrow against those future revenue streams in order to build out the complex of development in the first place. And so it's kind of a field of dreams thing in a way. It's built, if you build it, they will come, I guess, is the concept there. But it's been extraordinarily successful, really transformational for some places in Kansas that have just benefited. And we're talking about old industrial sites or just green fields that now they're, unfortunately, we don't have a Nebraska Furniture Mart, but that was one of their mainstays. That Nebraska Furniture Mart in Kansas, in the middle of a field, now this is several years into development and being mature, that Nebraska Furniture Mart in a very rural area of Kansas does more sales by itself than the city of Marion does.
Wow.
And the city of Marion, for 3 years in a row, has now topped $1 billion worth of sales.
Wow.
So if that gives you a scale of what this can do, not that we necessarily expect those kinds of results, but anyway, that concept kind of got reborn in a very strange way when the Black Diamond group of companies and their lead, Rodney Cabness, bought the mall. Rodney and I were sitting in a presentation actually with companies that help you bring new retail stores. So they're location companies, site selection companies, they call it. And we were literally staring at a screen with a Google map on it, and they were pointing out certain things to try. They're trying to sell us on them to hire them to help us reinvigorate the mall.
Right.
And in this map, the word on Google Maps, you can go look it up after the podcast, still says Starbond District on it.
Really?
And I looked at that. You can ask Rodney sometime, because I literally jumped up out of my chair and went, holy cow, that's it. And Rodney has absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. Neither do the people on the other end of the Zoom call that we were on. But anyway, so one of the key points of the legislation is that you have to have a certain number of square footage in a new retail development, specifically 150,000 square feet.
Okay.
So the aha moment for me that I wasn't able to verbalize at that particular moment is the mall is 300,000+ square feet. We already had that.
Yeah, it's already existing.
It's already there. The legislation doesn't say necessarily you have to build it brand new from the ground up. And so that's where it started, and then it's grown from there. But it was a very long trudge for 3 years to go through all the processes with the Illinois Department of Revenue to get them to approve it, which is far further than we ever got, almost 15 years ago, 14 years ago at this point. So that's very exciting. It, like everything else, it will take some time in order to come to fruition. Right now, we're in in August, IDOR approved our plan, and in September, the City Council approved the plan and handed to the final document needed. I literally did that on stage at the hearing with IDOR, and because the director of IDOR was there, and so then, as of January 1st, just a couple of weeks from now, they will start setting aside that sales tax revenue within that district. So anything new that comes in there and that generates sales tax revenue, we will have that money set aside then we can bond against eventually. And that's the process we're in now, is with the bond underwriters.
Okay.
For them to cross all their T's and dot their I's and figure out exactly what can be borrowed and how it can be paid back and that kind of thing. And I would suspect in the first or second quarter of next year, the city will actually bond the money. But those bonds, incidentally, since you're in the banking world,
Yes.
those are they are municipal bonds, but they are not general obligation bonds. And in our world, what that means is we're not pledging the full faith and credit of the city of Marion to pay back those bonds, which makes them a little bit riskier, but just the new revenue within the Star Bonds District. That makes them very unique, first of its kind in Illinois. So that's why this process takes a little bit to find the bond buyers and make sure that they understand what this is. However, because they're municipal bonds, they are double tax exempt still. So anybody that buys those bonds still does not pay state. If they live in Illinois, they don't pay state income tax, nor do they pay federal income tax. So a 6% on that bond might equate, depending on what tax bracket you're in, to a much higher rate, which is not to say I expect individuals or local people to buy these bonds. It's quite the opposite. I think probably big bond buyers will probably buy all of them at once, just simply because that's the world they're in. And the amount of money that we're talking about, while pretty large for our location, is not that much in their billions and billions of dollars of portfolio. But anyway, it's a very interesting concept. It's a very interesting bonding process to go through. I think it will take 4 to 6 years at a minimum to build that stuff out.
Yeah.
There's 3 phases to this initial project plan 1, which is building out the mall as a retail destination. 2 is I almost hesitate to use this brand name, but because it's not a Top Golf, but it's a Top Golf-like facility. I would call it Top Golf Plus because it's got pickleball courts and a lot of other facilities, not just golf. And then thirdly is what they're calling Oasis South, which is that big area west of Sam's that they have been working on and clearing for a new retail development there as well.
Wow, I'm excited to see all that unfold.
That was a lot of words. Sorry.
No, but it's all really, really great things. And like I said earlier, great for the city, drawing more people to this area. Yeah. Another one of the things that you spoke about at the luncheon was transportation and new ways that we're bringing new transportation options to draw people to the area. I know you mentioned Contour Airlines, and we can talk a little bit about that, and then our Wildcat bus.
Yep.
Yeah.
2 things that we've worked on, really Contour for the last year and a half. That was an interesting sequence of events as well. You know, life tends to throw you some curveballs. So Carbondale, the city of Carbondale officials met with me wanting us to work on something together. We've been for 5 years now trying to enhance and rebuild our relationship between those 2 towns, and successfully, if I might say so. And but they wanted a big project to work on together, and one of those is to bring an additional airline to Williamson County, not necessarily a replacement, but an additional one. So we started on the process of grant funding for that and trying to figure out what that would look like. And then in the midst of all that, the pandemic hit and airlines went berserk in terms of trying to they had pilot shortages and all kinds of things. And so the cost went up a lot.
Tremendously, yeah.
For that airline, for any airline for that matter. So that became an obstacle. And then in the midst of all that, Cape Air announced that they were terminating their contract. They were willing to rebid it, I guess, in that this is all federally Cape Air was federally subsidized, and so they call it EAS, Essential Air Service. That's the program. So apparently they were able to terminate their contract prematurely and rebid it. But when they do that, everybody else gets to come back and rebid it too. And so Contour came along because we had been talking to them, and they rebid it. That's a much different class of aircraft than what we have had available to us going to St. Louis and Nashville, meaning that it's a 30-seat regional jet, a much faster aircraft, much more comfortable in terms of leg room. They do offer, for example, refreshment service on there, which is kind of odd because I didn't even get to finish my Pepsi by the time I got to Chicago when I went.
Gonna say, how long is the flight?
It's about 49 minutes, wheels up to wheels down.
Beats the 7-hour drive.
It does take some time to taxi, particularly at O'Hare.
Yeah.
So it does take longer than it does take longer than 50 minutes, but it is an extraordinarily quick flight, very comfortable flight, and very affordable. So what we've seen thus far, it's only been operating since August 1st, and they've had some bumps in the road, as you would expect. This is Contour's first terminal at O'Hare. So they've had to get signage and all kinds of things at O'Hare. It's a big airport. And it's a lot of logistics there. But thus far, the count, if you will, is there's about 1.5 times the passenger traffic coming into Southern Illinois on the margin. And when we're looking at total enplanements versus what was going to St. Louis or Nashville, the extra ones that are happening, about 50% more of them are coming into Southern Illinois than are going out. And this is indicative of what we expected, because this is not just, of course, for Marion or Williamson County, but SIU, a lot of the other ISON, a lot of the other bigger employers, even just the traveling doctors and nurses that for Deaconess and the Harrisburg operations, all of it is benefiting, we're finding, from this Chicago connection. And what's even more important to some people is you can get anywhere in the world from Chicago. That's no longer true with St. Louis.
That's true.
So the outbound connections from Chicago are just almost exponential in offerings versus what St. Louis was. So thus far, only 4 months into it, but it's working very well, albeit they've had some hiccups, no doubt. But so that's one thing that took a long time to work through. You mentioned the Wildcat route. So this is a partnership with Rides Mass Transit, which has been around for a long time, both in Jackson County, well, really all of Southern Illinois, but in Marion. That was an itinerant on-call type bus service where people that were going to a doctor's appointment, or even if they just needed to go to the grocery store, that you would call them a day or two ahead of time, and they'd come pick you up at an appointed time and take you back. But what we are experiencing nationwide is a shortage in the workforce.
Yeah.
Part of that, I think that's a multi-legged stool that problem balances on. One, but two of those have to do with quality and reliable transportation. It's pretty simple to understand. If you can't get to your job, it's very difficult to have a job. One of the other stools that is very difficult for a locality like Marion or municipality to solve is childcare. There's some work going on at the national level through grants and funding and whatever, but that is that's another conundrum that we have to deal with. But so what we asked Rides Mass Transit to do was establish a fixed route bus service for about 12 hours a day, 6 a.m. roughly to 6 p.m. And if the city would put up bus shells in certain places, for example, the library downtown, Boynton Street Community Center, the high rises where the public housing is at, and then stop at some of our larger employers like ISON, the hospital, the grocery stores, Walmart, Target, Kroger, and have that on a loop so that every stop had a bus at it every 30 minutes, then someone could just literally hop on the loop and get to a doctor's appointment, get to work, or at least get closer to work in most cases. And that also has been going on just in earnest since about March, I believe, and they've had 33,000 people ride that. And what's critical about this whole thing is it costs at most $1. And if you're elderly or if you've got a disability, it's 50 cents.
Wow.
And so I think that's extraordinary. I said at the luncheon, of all things, and I get asked a lot, what are you happiest about? What are you most proud of, or whatever? I think that's probably it.
Yeah.
That came at no cost to the city. That's federally funded through Rides Mass Transit, although we've got some cost in the bus shells, which we're still trying to put up. But I feel like that is an extraordinarily good development for Marion, and it just simply makes people more mobile. It's hard to imagine for the people in this room
Right.
what just getting groceries would be like if you don't have a way to get there, you know, or if you've got to pay an expensive cab ride or something just for that. It becomes overwhelming. It becomes an economic problem in of itself. So anyway, that's that story and something I'm particularly proud of.
I love that. How many stops are there within Marion? Do you know offhand?
Originally, we had planned for 20. We haven't got there yet.
Okay.
So, and really, we keep pushing Rides Mass Transit to expand on the eastern side of Marion.
Okay.
There's a lot of residents that just don't. I think the easternmost bus stop is probably on Market Street at this point.
Right.
We're supposed to get one at Ray Fossey Park at some point, and so forth. So we're trying to move that way to where the residents live to give them easier access. But I don't know right this moment exactly how many stops are. They've got a great app, by the way. It's really cool.
What's the app called?
I'd have to look and find it, but you can find it on the App Store, either on Google or on Apple. Just put Rides Mass Transit, and it'll come up. But you can watch the little buses, and you can see exactly where they're at.
You can see them.
You can see where they're at and see exactly how many people are on the bus.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's super cool. It's convenient, and it's working, and I'm proud of it.
That's great. Very cool. I know another really big thing you worked on was getting a bike trail all the way to Carbondale. Is that right?
Yeah, that has all been constructed over many years. It started well before I got here, and it's been done in segments. If you drive from Carbondale to Marion, you'll see they're still working on it. I noticed, I came through on Sunday, and there by where the Kia dealership is, you can see the big wide sidewalk going off on the south, and it's not finished. But ultimately, that bike trail will connect all the way to the CRISP complex at the high school.
Wow.
And I'd like to see it, frankly, move beyond that. That there's some logistical issues. I'd like to see it run all the way down to Tunnel Hill.
Oh, that would be so
I think
nice.
that'd make a heck of a bike ride
It
for
really
people.
would be.
But it's a healthy alternative. Obviously, I don't know that people will bike to work necessarily from Carbondale to Marion or vice versa, but they're certainly going to have that opportunity. I'm more excited about it terminating or at least stopping as a waypoint at the CRISP complex, because there's so many residents that live on that area. Yeah. You'll be able to just take your bike right over to a parking lot, hop it, take it off the back of the car or whatever, and go miles or just a few hundred yards, whatever you want to do. But that's going to be great too.
That's what, when I moved here, I'm originally from Minnesota. And so Minnesota is known for its great bike trails. And that was something this area was really missing, was that just hop on a bike trail and I could ride downtown to go to work. And there was actually a concierge when you get to downtown Minneapolis, you could pay to park your bike in a bike locker, and there was like a shower and everything, and you could just go to work after riding to work in the city. It was kind of cool. So I'm excited to see that come here.
Yeah. I would love to hear you kind of talk about the things that are happening downtown a little bit, like with the Civic Center and Third Thursdays that have kind of been introduced. I just think it's amazing what's happening downtown with the renovations. I always get like messages from like friends on Instagram who don't live around here, and they're like, "Where do you live? Like, you live in a Hallmark movie." Like, I love that. And it's amazing. Yeah, because I think a lot of people outside of here are noticing what's happening, and I think it's really appealing. I think a lot of times people give small towns a really bad rap, but to see all these really charming things that are happening, I think it's just amazing and opening the eyes of people to possibly move to an area like this. So,
well, one of the things that I ran on as in the campaign for this office was not leaving as we build up. Well, let me step back. Here's the analogy that I made. Started with, we need to put our visitor glasses on. If we want people to move here, live here, work here, we have to start looking at our town through visitor glasses, like they see it the first time they come through. If you think about your own house, for example, I'll use my own house as an example. I've got a little crack in sheetrock right near the front door that I've walked past for the 17 years that I've lived in that house. Doesn't bother me a bit. I'm sure my guests see it, and I'm positive that if I were to want to sell the house, I'm going to need to fix that, that crack. We all grow accustomed to our environment. And the analogy that I made is if you're driving on the interstate overpass at 70 miles an hour on the west side of town, and you look over and you see all the concrete shiny and new, and it's well lit, and it looks, frankly, Marion looks at that from that vantage point like a much bigger town than it is, population wise. But if you are coming into town from the other directions, particularly the older ways into town at, say, 20 miles, 30 miles an hour, it looks quite a bit different. And if what I was experiencing when I was campaigning, when you're walking streets at 1 mile an hour, knocking on doors, you certainly see things that, even though I've lived here almost my entire life, you certainly see things a different way. And that we had to be honest with ourselves and look at what other people see, and as the decay that was happening in certain parts of town needed to be addressed. And didn't necessarily speak of the square specifically, but that the older part of town, which of course this square is centric to, we could not leave it behind. As we grow other parts of town, that's what almost happens with every small town, especially if an interstate goes through or something, which ours did 60 years ago, but things naturally gravitate that way. Your old business district starts to dilapidate, move away, just because you haven't been able to attract. You cannot expect to have commerce where you cannot attract people.
Yeah.
That's just like business 101. Sometimes that's a chicken and egg argument, which comes first. But going to the events that are going on, I was absolutely convinced that if we could attract people downtown, then commerce could not only survive, but it could thrive, and that it would be charming. One of the things I talked about in the, it does not come without its challenges, and I talked about this in the luncheon. What we have to remember, like the most common complaint I get, is there's no parking. Well, first of all, it's not true. We may have done and still are doing, we're getting ready to address that, but we have not historically done the best job at marking and identifying where that parking is at.
Yes.
And we have to do a better job with that, no question. But there are 700 plus free parking places within 2 blocks of the clock. 700. Wow. No charge. They're all city owned. They're almost all well lit, and ones that aren't are going to be. The reason I say 2 blocks from the clock is because that distance is the same from the front door of Walmart to the back of their parking lot. Nobody thinks
Isn't
twice.
That so funny?
Nobody thinks twice about walking from the back of the parking lot on Christmas Eve. They don't drive by and drive off because Walmart's parking lot is full.
That's right.
So true.
Downtown, we've got to get people to think differently.
Yes.
Our alleys off the square are our on and off ramps to most of the parking that we have. And so as part of the revitalization stage 2 that we're going to start in March, those alleys are going to be lit up with the bistro lights.
Great.
To make them an asset rather than a liability to the city, and make them a destination in a way in of themselves. That's why you have seen in some of the alleys, there's some artwork, some murals and things like that. We want people to walk through them, but we need them to feel safe and secure while they're doing it. So there's so many elements to this, but at the end, you've got to improve these things. This is called placemaking in the municipal development world. And that's why we started with the square, revitalized it, and why we made it available to groups like Marion Connects to host events down there. Because when you attract the people there, then the commerce can exist. When you attract the commerce, then people look to revitalize the buildings that they're in and reinvest in some of these that haven't been, frankly, touched. A few have, and they were really early adopters, like Katie Fowler at Lavish and Posh with Teresa. They moved before everybody else, and really several others. But for the most part, on the square proper, these buildings hadn't been touched and gotten to the point where they had to be torn down, some of them. So that all seems to be working. There's always a whole lot more to do. We started on the square because I get some grief from some corners for this. It's like, well, why are you spending the money on the square? You need to be spending it on, Oak Street or whatever. And, well, we don't own Oak Street,
Right.
not the properties that are on it. The square belongs to the city of Marion. That's the only public property that we control. So we're starting there and hoping that it emanates in all directions. Another thing that I mentioned is that we started something novel, which is a residential TIF district in the older the first one we did in 2020 was in I think you live in that area of town.
Yeah.
Do you
I think
not?
you do.
I missed it.
You just missed
I
it.
applied and then I think I was too late and I wasn't.
Well, good
able
news
to
for you. There will be another round.
It's perfect because I was actually going to email Cody this week and be like, "Is there another round?"
Yes, there will be. So the goal there, TIF is not necessarily, it's misunderstood in so many multitudes of ways, but a lot of people think it's just for businesses or whatever. It doesn't have to be. It can be used for residential areas too. And our goal here was the whole goal of putting in a TIF district is to provide incentives for people to build things in otherwise blighted or less developed areas. And when they do that, that generates new property tax. We're able to take that new property tax, and then this last year, which was the first year we were able to do it, takes a while for that to build up. We were able to make $250,000 worth of grants, $5,000 at a time, to residents in that area that could fix up their roof, their landscaping, to replace garage doors, a lot of different things, brick tuck pointing, siding replacement, window replacement. And the goal here is to create a virtuous cycle, which is, it's kind of like keeping up with the Joneses in a way, is that you see somebody, the way I look at it is actually the opposite. The reason that neighborhoods dilapidate is because one particular house is first and it kind of goes downhill. And then people are like, well, why would I want to plow a whole bunch of money into my house if the neighborhood's going to pot, so to speak? And so what we're trying to do is reverse that cycle. And the beauty of us putting in that $250,000 is that was a matching grant, so people had to put in their own money. And it actually led to $500,000 worth of investment just in that part of town in basically 5 or 6 months.
Think about that. If the community is actually incentivized to make those repairs, like it's only going to encourage more and more to do the same, and it just creates this cyclical, amazing
snowballs. And then your neighborhoods are now more appealing to people wanting to move to the area, and like, it is a concept that I think you definitely see around like Christmas time. Like you'll see certain neighbors will decorate their houses for Christmas, and then there's some neighborhoods that don't. But it's that concept of like when there is that like pride in their home and the way things look, it just kind of snowballs. So I think it's amazing, and I'm happy to hear that.
We hope to be able, that was not a one and done. We hope to be able, the actual nominal money amount will never be known until the tax bills come in and all that every year. But assuming that taxes don't go down, which they generally don't, we hope to be able to replicate that for, well, at least I may not be here for 20 years, but that TIF lasts for 23 years. Wow. So if you do that math at $500,000 a year of investment, half of which is being incentivized, you're talking about $10-12 million being reinvested in windows and roofs and
local businesses that are doing those things. Well,
that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. Part of that incentive is, in order for us to, any materials that you buy, for us to come along, you have to prove that you bought them in
locally,
the city of Marion.
Oh, wow.
So again, we're trying to make sure that goes back into local businesses.
So brilliant. I love it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, good. I know you talked about housing in the city of Marion and how there is all these new businesses come to town. And I want to talk about first some of these new businesses that are coming to town, because I know there's a lot of them with very great opportunities for employment. And then also the need for more housing. Yeah.
We are land poor in terms of city limits. It's actually relatively small city limits relative to our zip code. The 62959 zip code has twice the population that the city limits of Marion has. And so when we talk about Williamson County growing, Marion had a slight loss of population, and that's simply because where people are building is where the land's available, and where the land's available is not within city limits. So we've got, it's not really an economic problem because our town is growing and our commerce is certainly growing. Matter of fact, to give you evidence of that, I said that we'd reached $1 billion worth of sales 3 years in a row. That's grown by 25% since 2018.
Wow.
So
and think of all
part
we've
of that's
been
inflation, I'm sure, with
Yeah.
sales, but it's unprecedented growth that we're having, and that's because people are living here and people are stopping here and they're purchasing here, obviously. But whether the housing stock expands inside of city limits or not is not necessary. We could use the population. We get a lot of funding from the federal government and state government based on our population, but people say, well, you just need to expand city limits. Well, maybe people don't want to be in city limits, first of all. Second of all, there's a lot of cost to doing that. We do not levy a property tax. That's one of the things we enacted as part of the Vision 2020 plan that I gave to the council. We eliminated our portion of the property tax, which made everybody's tax bills go down by about 7%, property tax, in lieu of or exchange of a slight increase in the sales tax. So if we take on more property outside of city limits just to get the population, like I said, if we just annex 62959, annex that part, we would double our population. That's easy. Just not easy to take on all those roads and fire service and police service for all those areas. It comes with a cost. So that's not as much my concern as the population growth in of itself as it is the concept is you don't want people coming to work here and then taking their paycheck and going back to their hometown 20 miles away and spending it there. Right. We need that money to circulate here. I've talked several times at the chamber that $1 spent in our local economy will circulate between 5 and 7 more times before it actually exits our local economy. And this is in stark contrast to when we buy something online and send that dollar to China, to Seattle, wherever you're buying online. Clearly that dollar's gone forever. It never, ever comes back. It's being circulated somewhere else. So we need those paycheck dollars to stay as local as we can. We're not going to grab 100% of them, and that's evident already. For example, the analogy I give with that is Eisen, who's our biggest employer, has about 82 or 86 zip codes that are represented in their employment base. 86.
That's a lot.
That's a ton. And so a lot of their paycheck dollars are going, now some of those are local towns, here in Marion and Johnson City and West Frankfort and so forth. But we've got to make an effort to have enough housing stock that people have the opportunity to live locally. And we're short on it, frankly. And, you know, the world is changing in that a lot. My kids and maybe even between my age and my kids, which is probably about where you're at, I think, a lot of people don't want to own their own homes. They're wanting to own apartments, and they want the simplicity of that and the lack of having to maintain it and such. So apartments they get a bad rap, but you need a mix of that. That's just the world we live in.
Absolutely.
And so we're looking all the time for developers, whether it's inside of city limits or not, to take a look at Marion and provide some of that housing. And so there's a lot of jobs coming our way, and we've got that's really, from an economic standpoint, why we want the housing is just so their paycheck dollars can stay local.
Yeah. I know we talked about who was coming to town. I know we can talk a little bit about some of the opportunities for employment that will soon be here. And I know Jeff Diedrich and the Fowlers were working on that big development just outside of town, right?
Yeah, that's actually closer to Creel Springs, on the edge of Creel Springs off 166. That's Saline River Farms. I'm sure that's going to take a hot minute to get that big operation running, but they've made substantial progress with that, and I think that's looking at about 400. Last I heard was about 400 full-time jobs.
Wow, that's amazing.
You know, obviously we've added lots of restaurants.
Olive Garden's finally in Marion.
Yeah, Olive Garden is in Marion.
Prophecy has finally been fulfilled.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a long rumored one.
I've heard it all my whole life growing up.
I have to, well, not my whole life, but probably since the 80s I've heard that.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a certain type of job, certain type of pay level. We have done well and blessed to have a mix with FedEx building their distribution center here. Prior to that, ReaderLink, I was occupying almost all the square footage at the former Circuit City distribution warehouse, and that's kind of off people's radar. But they've brought triple-digit jobs there, and we're so blessed to have that. So you know, you got to have the manufacturing and distribution component as well as the hospitality component. Mm-hmm. We've got a few, at least two. One that is started, a hotel that's going up. And those overnight stays are going to generate more people to visit the restaurants and the local merchants as well. So there's just a mix of a lot of jobs going on there. The Oasis development, the Star Bonds project, over time, don't freak out over this number. The fees, because it takes a while. It may take 10 years to get to this point, or 5. Yeah. But that's supposed to generate, once it's all built out as planned, that's about 2,500 jobs.
Wow. Yeah.
So we got a lot of employment to fill over the next few years. And it's all exciting, but it's challenging all at the same time. We need to keep our kids here. We need to keep them engaged. We need to keep them in Marion Connect so they can make that connection with their town and want to stay here and work here and raise their families here. And that's my ultimate goal.
Amazing. So looking forward into 2024, are there any big things that you're most excited about, or anything happening within the city of Marion that you're most excited about?
Well, like I said, the square is going to become a hot mess all over again.
I think I looked one time when we were driving around the square, and it's really exciting because there's lots of new development, but there was also, I think, 8 dumpsters or 4 dumpsters.
Well, the dumpsters are gone for now. The Citadel building, interestingly enough, which I'm very close to that project, the Watermark Foundation, a charitable organization, owns that building. And the goal there is the Citadel is where the Vault restaurant is at, that tall 5-story building. It hasn't been occupied, the upper 3 floors, for 50 years probably. And to build that out as a small business incubator, we're already doing that on the 2nd floor, but we're very constrained by the 2,000 square feet or so that's on that floor. Yeah. And we're actually opening bids on that this afternoon, believe it or not. So that's the next big hot mess. Trying to figure out where to put a dumpster and all that stuff.
I feel your pain.
You know, the property lines for these buildings are the buildings themselves. Right. And so it's very difficult to logistically to do some of these projects. But beyond that, the pavement and the sidewalks, most of the sidewalks will all be redone. The planters, the crosswalks, all of that will be redone. The corners of the square where the parking is and will remain, for God's sakes, do not get it out there
no parking's going away.
That's all going to be, I wish I'd have brought a picture I could show, but that's all going to be brick pavers, kind of as an homage back to 100 plus years ago when the square was brick paved. So that's going to be a 8-month project next year, and crap will be torn up all over again. But that's the last phase of it, and so hopefully by this time next year that'll be complete, and our renaissance for the square will largely, from a public infrastructure standpoint, be complete. We replaced a 80 or 100-year-old water line that was up on the square. This year that was the first hot mess. But all this stuff takes time. It takes money and cobbling it together. The square revitalization was funded by several grants and some local participation, but there are millions of dollars that have been spent, and you're just starting to if you think it's good now, you're just starting to see the benefits of all that.
Well, it's beautiful. I think even just like the fountains alone have been just an amazing touch to the downtown and stuff like that. But I think it's, I think another thing people don't think are aware of is like those things are there because of specific grants. I think a lot of people don't understand that, the money that goes into that is for something like that, and that the city's getting those. Yeah,
and we do have substantial local participation. Don't take me wrong, but the federal grants we got for all that were, I think, just over $3 million. Okay. So we probably spent $1.1 million of local money to do that. But that was all part of the Vision 2020 and starting to set aside incremental revenues that we had to be able to do that stuff. So we have not increased people's property taxes to do that. Have no plan to do that whatsoever. And Marion's in great shape. So financially, matter of fact, Marion's in the best shape that it ever has been financially. So we're paying as we go and accomplishing what we came to do.
Well, thank you so much for being on today.
Yeah.
This has been just a joy. I love hearing all the things that you've got going on and all the things you have done. We're really excited about them all. So thank you.
Should be very proud of yourself and everything that you're doing.
Somebody asked me yesterday, I'll end with this because I don't want to take credit for this. I appreciate the compliment. Thank you. But just yesterday, somebody asked me, very much similar conversation, albeit not a podcast. Someday he said, I want you to tell me how you've done all this in such a short time. And he said, I said, well, it's very simple. I said, we don't have to have a lunch over it. I'll just tell you now. I said, you surround yourself with people that are smarter than you are, that are equally or better passionate and that can have a vision and that you're willing to empower to take something and run with it. And I've been so blessed from Cody, Jennifer Olson, Rachel Stroud, everybody that works at City Hall and really all the departments, street department, police department, everybody contributes to every piece of this. And what's interesting, I think that's what excites me the most is to see other people get excited and to be able to be in a position where I can, somebody else said, you just like to set people's hair on fire and watch them run. It is kind of like that. That's a kind of a bad visual, but so thank you for the compliment. But what you see is due to the people that were already at the city when I got there, and then some that I've surrounded myself with on my staff. None of it would be there without them. So thank you, but make sure you think
it's a great team.
It is a terrific team. I'm so proud of them and grateful that they are working, as should every taxpayer, frankly, be grateful that they're working for the city.
Absolutely. If you, if people wanted to get a hold of you or talk further about any of this that we've spoken about today, how can they reach you? Where can they find you?
Well, you can either email me, you can come by City Hall, the new City Hall, or my cell number is 618-294-1438.
Wonderful.
And I'd be happy to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much for being on here, Mayor Absher.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.
So, Jill, where do we go from here?
Be sure to check out our show notes for this episode, and also be sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.